I don't know why it only storms when everything else is already falling apart. Like bad weather reads your bank balance before it shows up. Mason Connor was already having one of those weeks, the kind where the fridge hums louder than your phone because nobody's calling with good news. He was working extra shifts at the auto shop, praying the roof held, and trying to stretch a grocery budget that didn't like being stretched. And now the rain had arrived, sideways and loud, punching the windows like it was mad at the house for standing still. He stood in the kitchen, elbows on the counter, watching the backyard disappear in sheets of gray. The swing set swayed under the wind like it wanted to escape. That's when he realized he hadn't heard a word from his daughter in over an hour. "Emily," he called down the hallway. "Nothing." He wiped his hands on the dish towel, stiff, stained, probably older than her, and walked toward her room. She was curled up on the bed, headphones on, face dimly lit by her tablet screen. Lightning flashed outside, and she didn't even blink. He knocked on the frame gently. "Em?" She pulled one side of the headphones off. "Hey, you all right?" "Yeah, storm's getting wild out there." "I noticed." Mason walked in and glanced at her screen. Another video of that female pilot again, the one who did those flight walkthroughs and talked like every switch in a cockpit had a purpose. "You watching her again?" he asked. Emily nodded. "I want to be her," she said, quiet but certain. That hit harder than the thunder outside. He didn't answer right away, because what was he supposed to say? Flying lessons, licensing, gear. They could barely afford fresh tires for his truck. "I believe you could," he said, which was true, even if life hadn't caught up with them yet. Then the power went out. He grabbed the flashlight and did the usual loop, checked the breaker, cursed at nothing in particular, told the storm it could take a hike. The house had been passed down from his father. It creaked in all the wrong places and leaked from everywhere else, but it was still standing. He was halfway through the kitchen again when he heard something outside, not thunder, not wind, a thud, followed by a scrape. His gut tightened. He aimed the flashlight out through the back door. Something was moving near the fence line. He stepped out, boots sinking into wet grass. The light caught a shape, human, crumpled, not moving. He ran. She was alive, barely, wearing a flight suit. Mud smeared across her face, a shallow cut on her head bleeding into her hairline. One of her arms was tucked awkwardly beneath her. Mason knelt, checked her pulse. Steady. "Hey," he said, "can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. "Where you're safe," he said. "You crashed." She opened her mouth, voice dry, weak, ejected. Then she passed out again. He didn't think, didn't hesitate, just picked her up and carried her back through the storm. Emily was at the back door, barefoot and wide-eyed. "Dad, who?" "Call 911. Now." She sprinted for the landline. Mason laid the woman down on the old couch and grabbed a towel from the laundry basket, pressed it to her head. She groaned. "You're all right," he said, unsure who he was trying to convince. The paramedics showed up 20 minutes later, slow-going through the flooded road. They checked her vitals, asked the usual questions. One of them lifted her arm and noticed the patch on her flight suit. "Military?" Mason asked. "Air Force, judging by this." "I didn't see a plane," she said. She ejected. Mason nodded. "Then that thing's still out there," the medic said. "Search and rescue'll comb the woods by morning." They loaded her into the back of the rig. No sirens, too risky on these roads. Mason and Emily stood in the doorway, watching them vanish into the rain. "You think she'll be okay?" Emily asked. "I think she didn't fall out of the sky for no reason." Emily's eyes stayed on the road. "She was like one of those pilots I watch." "Maybe she is." A quiet pause. Then Emily whispered, "Do you think she'll remember us?" Mason watched the last of the red taillights disappear. "I don't know," he said, but something told him this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The rain stopped sometime after midnight. But the stillness it left behind was heavier than the storm ever was. Mason sat at the kitchen table, elbows on worn wood, watching the sunrise paint the backyard in streaks of gold and gray. The swing set was still standing, a little more crooked now. A towel dripped quietly near the back door, muddy footprints trailing in from the night before. Emily hadn't said much since the ambulance pulled away. She'd gone to bed like she was sleepwalking, and Mason couldn't blame her, because he wasn't sure what he'd seen either. He wasn't even sure she was real, the woman in the flight suit with eyes that had opened just long enough to say ejected before passing out cold, military. That's what the medic had said, but no one had called. No one had shown up. No reports, no search helicopters, just silence. Like it never happened. At 8:12 a.m., someone knocked on the door. Mason opened it to find two men in black windbreakers standing on his porch, not uniforms, but close. One was tall, sharp hairline, government posture. The other had a tablet out, scanning over something Mason couldn't see. "Mr. Connor," the tall one asked. Mason nodded. "We're with the Department of Defense Liaison Office. Just a few questions, if you don't mind." He stepped aside. "They didn't mind if we come in?" the tablet guy asked. Mason crossed his arms. "Depends on the questions." They glanced at each other. "We're looking into a reported incident last night," the tall one said. "An aircraft distress signal was registered in this general area." "Distress signal," Mason repeated. "Yes. We've recovered the source, a training beacon, but the aircraft itself hasn't been located." "Training?" "That's correct. So it wasn't real. We believe it was part of a controlled simulation that may have malfunctioned. No civilian danger." Mason blinked. "A simulation sent a pilot through my back fence and bleeding on my couch." Another glance between the two men. "We're simply confirming what was seen," tablet guy said. "Did you encounter anyone on your property last night?" Mason held their stare. "She was hurt," he said finally. "I called an ambulance." "Do you know where she was taken?" "Local ER, probably. You'd know before I would." The taller one nodded like he was confirming a theory. "Thank you for your time. If anyone contacts you, please let us know." He handed over a card. Plain, just a number. Mason didn't take it. "You got a name?" The man paused. "Just the number," he said, then turned and walked off the porch. The two of them disappeared into a black SUV with no plates and tinted windows. Mason stood there, watching the dust trail rise off the dirt road as they vanished down the bend. Simulation. He didn't buy it. Not for a second. Emily was up when he came back inside, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal she hadn't touched. "They were from the government," she said, not looking up. Mason blinked. "How'd you?" "I saw them out the window." He poured himself a cup of coffee, took the seat across from her. "They said it was some kind of training mission." Emily looked up. "So she's not real?" "She's real," Mason said. "I carried her into this house, that part I'm sure of." "Then why wouldn't they tell you who she is?" He didn't have an answer, so he took a sip of coffee instead. Emily leaned back in her chair. She looked like a real pilot, like the ones I watch. She was a real pilot. Then why are they lying? Mason met her eyes, and in that moment he saw it, the look he'd worn himself once. That gut-level knowing when something didn't sit right and you couldn't pretend it did. She was too young to know how deep that rabbit hole could go. But she was already halfway down it. He called the hospital around noon. The nurse on the line asked for a name. He didn't have one. She came in last night. Medics picked her up from a house on White Pine Road. "We can't give out patient information without a name," the nurse said flatly. "She's military," Mason added, even flatter. "Then we definitely can't give you anything." Click. He stared at the phone for a long time after that, not angry, just tired. That night, Emily pulled out her sketch pad. She hadn't drawn in weeks. But now she was at the kitchen table, hunched over it like the pencil was keeping her steady. Mason passed behind her, glanced down. She was sketching the pilot. What little she remembered. The boots, the shoulder patch, the way her arm hung like it was broken. "You've got a good eye," he said. Emily didn't look up. "I don't want to forget her face." He paused. "You won't." She nodded slowly, then pointed to something in the corner of the page, a set of numbers. Mason squinted. "What's that?" "Her shoulder patch," she said. "I saw the numbers." "Just barely," while the medics were strapping her in. He leaned in. The numbers were fuzzy, a little off, but there was enough. A serial format, military. He took a photo of the sketch, then stayed up half the night trying to cross-reference it online. Nothing came up. But he wasn't surprised. Some records weren't meant to be found. 2 days passed. No word, no news, no sign of a crash, no follow-up from the men in the SUV. Emily stayed quiet, but she didn't stop drawing. By the third page, Mason noticed something different. In each sketch, the pilot was sitting, not in pain, not confused, but smiling, and Emily was beside her in a jumpsuit of her own. On the fourth night, Mason stepped out to take the trash. The sky had cleared finally, crisp and full of stars. As he walked back up the porch steps, he froze. Someone was sitting on the top step, a woman, shoulder still bandaged. Jacket zipped halfway, face half lit by the porch bulb. It was her, the pilot. Mason said nothing at first, neither did she. Then finally, "They said you left the hospital," he said quietly. "I did. You were supposed to be recovering." "I recover better on my feet." He nodded once. "You shouldn't be here. They told me not to come." "Then why are you?" She turned her head just slightly, looking past him toward the window. "Because your daughter's drawings made it all the way back to base command." Mason blinked. "What?" She stood slowly, wincing just slightly. "She drew my patch, my number, and someone passed it along. I got flagged for contact." Mason opened the door. She didn't walk in yet. "There's more to this," he said. "Isn't there?" She met his eyes. "There is. Are you going to tell me?" "I'll tell her," the woman said, "when she's ready." And then she stepped inside. And Mason had the strange feeling that everything, from the broken swing set to the impossible dream that lived in Emily's heart, had just shifted. Mason didn't sleep much that night. Not because of the storm, it was gone now. Not because of fear, but because the house felt different. Not crowded, just charged, like something unspoken was hanging in the air, waiting to land. The pilot, she still hadn't told them her name. She didn't offer it, and Mason didn't press. There was a certain calm about her, like someone used to being underestimated and was fine with it. They gave her the guest room, which was really just the old office with a futon and a pile of laundry Mason hadn't gotten to yet. She didn't complain. She thanked him quietly, like someone who didn't often say thank you but meant it when she did. Emily didn't ask any questions that night. She just stared at her like she'd seen a ghost with a flight suit and a purpose. Mason wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but he knew it wasn't going to be normal. Morning came with no knock. The pilot was already in the kitchen, barefoot, drinking coffee from the chipped blue mug Mason always meant to throw away. She was reading the newspaper, the actual paper, not her phone, like she'd always been part of this routine. Mason blinked. "You sleep. Enough." He poured himself a cup, sat across from her. They didn't speak right away. Then she said, "Emily's smart." "She is," Mason agreed. "She's also determined. You can't teach that. I've been trying." She looked at him with a small smile, not pity, just recognition. "I didn't mean you're not doing enough," she said. "Just, she's wired for more." Mason stirred his coffee. "She wants to fly," he said quietly. "I know. She can't afford to dream that big. That's not your call." He looked up. "That's what they told me when I was 14, she said, folding the newspaper. "That I wasn't built for it. Too small, too quiet, no connections, but I flew anyway." He didn't answer. She set the paper down. "I left something for her on the table." Mason raised an eyebrow. "What kind of something?" "You'll see." Emily found the letter after breakfast. It was a simple white envelope with her name in clean, careful handwriting. She opened it on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her, Mason sitting nearby pretending not to watch. Inside, a patch, a real one. Military grade, wings, crest, an insignia she didn't recognize, and a note, "Emily, there's more than one way to get off the ground. Some start in jets. Others start in wind tunnels, flight sims, or even paper planes. Here's your first patch. You don't have to earn it to wear it. You earn it by chasing what it stands for. R." Emily didn't blink. She just stared at the patch like it was a key to a door no one else could see. Then she looked up. Can I ask her questions? Mason nodded. I think she's hoping you will. They sat on the porch that afternoon, Emily, the pilot, and the wind. Mason gave them space, kept the screen door open just enough to hear their voices drifting in and out. Emily asked the questions he'd expected. What kind of plane did you fly? What's it like to take off? Do you ever get scared? And the pilot answered without dramatics or fluff, just facts, honest ones. She talked about gravity and G-forces and the quiet just before a dive, about being upside down and not knowing which way was the sky, about how fear was just focus waiting to happen. Then Emily asked something quieter. What happens when you crash? The pilot paused. Mason tensed. But then she said, you survive it if you're lucky. And if you're not, then someone else flies because of you. Emily didn't speak for a while after that. Just held the patch tight in her palm, like she finally understood what it was worth. Later, when Emily was back in her room, Mason sat outside with the pilot. He said. That's what you signed the note. She nodded. Short for something. It was my call sign. Raven. Mason raised an eyebrow. I don't ask why they picked it, but it stuck. You still in? She hesitated. Technically, I'm classified as inactive reserve. That's government code for we're done with you until we're not. So you crashed here. I ejected. Right. She smiled faintly. I'm not supposed to talk about it, but I will say this, I wasn't flying solo, and the other half of the team didn't land so soft. That sobered him. You were on a mission, training they'll call it, but missions don't always involve guns. He nodded. The suits that came by, they didn't want you found. No, they didn't. Why? She looked out over the trees. Because the government doesn't like reminders that their most expensive systems can still fall out of the sky. Mason was quiet for a beat. And now what? She turned to him. I stick around for a few days, long enough to finish healing. Maybe help a kid remember her dreams not dead. That's simple. Simple's the hardest thing to pull off. That evening, Mason found Emily outside in the backyard, trying to build a glider out of scrap cardboard, duct tape, and popsicle sticks. It didn't fly, not even close, but she laughed when it nosedived into the dirt. He hadn't heard that laugh in weeks, maybe months. He didn't say anything, just sat on the back steps and let it echo. That night, the woman known only as Raven made a call. No phone, no wires. Just a secure laptop and a silent network node she pulled from her duffel bag like it had been waiting for the right moment. The screen flickered. A single prompt appeared. Status update, she typed, downed, intact. Unofficial contact made. Civilian protection confirmed. Pause. Then a follow-up line, you're not cleared to re-engage. She typed, I never was. The screen went dark. She closed the lid and smiled. Not the smile of someone who just disobeyed protocol, the smile of someone who finally did the right thing. 2 days after the pilot arrived, the air around the house changed. It wasn't just the calm after the storm. It was something else, harder to name. Like potential had started pooling under the floorboards. Emily wasn't just drawing anymore. She was building things, cutting cardboard wings, modifying drone kits from the junk drawer, sketching out how lift works with pencils that kept snapping under pressure. Mason watched all of it quietly, like a man watching his daughter walk a tightrope he hadn't known was strung over their house the whole time. And Raven, she still hadn't said her full name, but she'd made herself part of the rhythm. She cooked simple meals. She cleaned up without being asked. She didn't hover, but she didn't vanish either. She was, in every way, present, and Mason wasn't used to that. Most people showed up in his life needing something, then left once they figured out he didn't have much to give. Raven never asked. Which made it all the stranger when, that afternoon, she finally did. It started with a knock on his garage door. Mason was under the truck, changing the oil with a flashlight tucked behind his ear, and a wrench he'd retaped 3 times. He rolled out, wiped his hands, and found her standing in the sun, holding something in a slim metal case. "What's that?" he asked. She handed it to him. He opened it slowly. Inside, a flight sim tablet, military-grade touchscreen preloaded with basic tutorials and a short message on the home screen. Cadet Training Module, Civilian STEM Adaptation Program. Soar. Mason looked up. "Where'd you get this?" "From the last place I landed before here." He waited. She added, "It's not official. It's not illegal either. Think of it like a bridge." "A bridge to what?" "Basic ground school, sim hours, remote observation flights, a test run." He held the tablet like it might break. "You want me to give this to Emily?" "No," Raven said. "I want you to decide if you give it to her." Mason looked down again. "This isn't a toy," he said. "No, it's a map." He swallowed. "She's 12. She'll understand more than you think." He didn't respond. Raven stepped back. "You don't have to answer now." But the question was already humming in his chest like a motor turning over. What if this wasn't just a moment? What if it was the moment? That night, Emily sat across from him at dinner, stirring her spaghetti like it might reveal answers. She hadn't said much, but she was buzzing. He could tell, so he slid the tablet across the table like it was nothing. Like it wasn't the most terrifying thing he'd handed anyone since she was born. Her eyes widened. She looked at him, then Raven, then back down. "What is this?" Mason said. "It's a real flight sim, not a game. Not a fake." Her fingers hovered just above the screen, then pulled back. "Why me?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" She looked small again all of a sudden. Not because of her size, because of the world pressing in around her. "I'm just me." Raven leaned forward. "You think pilots are born that way, that we show up in flight suits and perfect posture?" Emily shrugged. "We come from farms, apartments, group homes, people who think gravity means you don't belong up there. But I don't know anything yet." "Exactly," Raven said. "That's where you start." Emily looked at her dad. He didn't smile, but he nodded. "Go ahead," he said. She tapped the screen. And just like that, her dream stopped being theoretical. It started. Later that night, Mason found Raven outside again. She was sitting on the back porch steps, hoodie pulled over her head, eyes on the stars. He joined her in silence. "She's already halfway through the first module," Raven said. "Of course she is." They both laughed, then it faded. Raven turned her head slightly. "I wasn't supposed to come here." "You said that already." "No," she said. "I mean it wasn't in the flight path. My eject trigger malfunctioned. I should have landed in the valley. There's a base there. Instead, I got blown east." Mason looked over. "You saying you weren't meant to crash here?" "No," she said, almost smiling. "I'm saying I'm glad I did." They sat in silence a while longer. Then Raven stood. "Just in case I'm not around tomorrow." Mason stood too. "Wait, you're leaving?" "Soon. I've stayed long enough." She walked back toward the house. He followed. Neither of them noticed the black sedan parked just up the road, or the man watching from inside, phone pressed to his ear, listening. The next morning, someone knocked on the door, not polite, not soft. It was the kind of knock that wanted to be heard. Mason opened the door slowly. There was a man in a blue suit, dark sunglasses, and a badge he didn't flash. He just let it sit there on his belt, glowing like authority without introduction. "Can I help you?" Mason asked. "I'm looking for someone. Female, mid-30s, Caucasian, military background, possibly injured." Mason stepped outside. "Don't know anyone like that." The man smirked. "You're lying." Mason didn't flinch. "You got a warrant." "Don't need one." "Then you're not coming in." A long beat of silence passed between them. Then the man reached into his coat. Mason tensed. But it was just a phone. He held it up. Raven's face was on the screen, a photo from what looked like a base roster. Underneath, "Captain Eva Ryan, classified record. She's not dangerous," the man said. "But she's out of bounds." "Is that a crime?" "No," he said, "but it's an inconvenience." Mason folded his arms. "Sometimes people need to disappear for a minute." The man tucked the phone away. "You have no idea who she really is." "Maybe not," Mason said, "but I know who she's been to us." The man paused. "You're in over your head. I've been under it for years." "This is nothing." Another stare down. Then the man stepped off the porch. "She leaves today, or next time it's not me knocking." And he walked away. Mason found Raven in the garage she was packing, quiet, precise. "You saw him," she said before he opened his mouth. "He showed me your name." She zipped the bag. "I figured they'd come eventually." Mason exhaled. "Do you have to go?" She looked up. Her face was still, not cold, just resolved. "I was never meant to stay. But you changed something here." "I didn't change anything," she said. "I just reminded both of you what was already possible." He wanted to argue, but he didn't, because he knew she was right. Still, something inside him twisted. She walked past him, duffel bag over her shoulder, paused at the front door. "Tell Emily. Tell her I'll be watching the skies." And then she was gone, no fanfare, no storm, just gone. Emily found the note later that day, taped to the back of the flight tablet. It wasn't long. "Fly straight. Stay curious. The world doesn't always make room for you. Sometimes you build the runway yourself." Eva, she read it twice. Then she cried. Then she wiped her eyes and opened the next module. 5 years later, the sky looked exactly the same, blue stretching forever, clouds hanging like soft armor, wind carrying the hum of engines and nerves. Emily Connor stood on the tarmac, boots planted, helmet in hand, heart steady. She was 17 now, taller, sharper, but still with that same quiet fire in her eyes, the one Raven had seen long before Emily believed it was there. The Cadet Soar program had changed her life. It wasn't flashy. It didn't get you into the Air Force in one leap. But it gave you real-world simulator hours, local mentorship, and if you stuck with it, a shot at something bigger. Emily stuck with it through part-time jobs, school projects, late nights on broken simulators, and Saturdays spent fixing gear most kids gave up on. She kept that flight tablet for years, never updated the background. The message Raven left was still there every time she powered it on. The world doesn't always make room for you. Sometimes you build the runway yourself. Today, she was doing just that. Mason stood off to the side near the chain-link fence. He wasn't trying to draw attention, never had. He wore the same scuffed boots, the same clean but faded shirt, and the same look of disbelief he'd worn since the moment the acceptance email came in. Orientation flight confirmed. Cadet Emily Connor, priority slot. He didn't know what that meant at first. Until the woman on the phone explained, Emily had outscored most of her peers. Her patchwork simulator hours, her self-led repairs, her technical breakdowns of airframes, they'd been watching her, not just instructors, but people with rank, people who knew the name Eva Ryan. They called her Captain Ryan now, officially MIA, unofficially erased from a few lists. But the right people still remembered, and Mason could tell. This flight today, it wasn't just for Emily, it was for her. Emily suited up in silence. The pre-flight briefing was short. This was just a passenger ride, no controls, not yet. But it was still a military-grade trainer jet. Her pilot was a woman named Carson, sharp, friendly, kept her explanations tight. "You nervous?" she asked, checking Emily's harness. "Not really." Carson smiled. "That usually means you're lying." Emily shook her head. "I've been flying since I was 12. Carson paused. "Oh yeah, who taught you?" Emily smiled faintly. "A friend." The jet roared to life. From the fence line, Mason watched it taxi, turn, pause, then launch. The sound hit him like a wave. He flinched, then smiled. Because it wasn't fear, it wasn't dread. It was the sound of everything changing. Emily was airborne for real. No simulators, no cardboard wings, just sky, just possibility, just her, up in the air. Emily barely breathed. Not because she was scared, but because her body knew how long she'd waited for this. The weight of gravity pressing against her chest. The silence between engine climbs. The shift when the jet banked and the world tilted sideways. She thought it would be louder, but it wasn't. It was clean. Carson guided the plane through a soft arc. "All right, cadet, we're about 3,000 feet up. This is where most people either grin or throw up." Emily smiled under her helmet. "Not me." "Good," Carson said, "because I want to show you something." She tapped the console. A new heading appeared. And suddenly, Emily recognized the map. They were turning toward home. From the air, the world looked different. The roads were smaller, the trees softer. The broken fence line behind Mason's house, still there, still half repaired, looked like part of a map someone forgot to finish. Emily saw the roof, the swing set, the garage where she'd first held the tablet Raven gave her, and then Carson said something into her earpiece. "You've got someone watching from below." Emily smiled. "I know." Back on the ground, Mason shielded his eyes from the sun. The jet passed overhead, low enough to rattle the tools in the shed, fast enough to steal his breath. But for a second, it slowed, just a fraction, long enough for one tight arc over the property, not flashy, just deliberate, like a signature in the sky. He didn't wave, didn't cheer, just watched and whispered she did it. That night, after the flight, Emily sat on the porch again, older now, but in the same spot she once built gliders from cardboard and tape. Mason brought out 2 mugs of cocoa. She took hers with a grin. "This your version of champagne?" "Budget-friendly." She took a sip. "Still terrible." They both laughed. Then Emily leaned back. "She'd be proud of you," Mason said quietly. Emily looked out at the stars. "I think she already was." They didn't say her name. They didn't have to. Inside, the flight tablet was still charging. Same cracked corner, same old interface. But when Emily checked it before bed, a new message blinked on the screen, not from any known program. Just 4 words, "You're cleared for more." She stared at it, then powered it down. Because she didn't need permission anymore.